Do you believe a dog can change the destiny of two people? Autumn, 1892, Pine Ridge, Tennessee. The leaves burned gold and crimson across the Cumberland Gap, and the air carried that particular mountain cold that warned of early winter. Copper ran through the forest like death itself was chasing him, his red-brown coat flashing between the trees, his massive paws churning through the fallen leaves. Blood matted the fur around his muzzle, but it was not his own. The red-boned coonhound had found something up on Blue Ridge Trail, something that sent him tearing back down the mountain, with his ears pinned and his throat raw from barking. At the base of Pine Ridge, where the land flattened into a small clearing carved from wilderness, Jacob McAllister was splitting wood. The axe rose and fell with methodical precision, each strike biting deep into seasoned oak. Jake was 34 years old, but looked older, the way mountain men do when they have given up on anything but survival. He stood 6'2", with shoulders broad as an ox yoke and arms corded with muscle from years of timber work. His beard was dark and thick, streaked with early gray, and his hair hung past his collar, tied back with a strip of leather. A scar ran down his left cheek, pale against sun-darkened skin, a reminder of a saw blade that kicked back during his logging days. His right hand gripped the axe handle with only a thumb and 2 fingers. The middle, ring, and little fingers were gone, severed clean at the second knuckle 4 years ago when a tree fell wrong and a steel cable snapped under 10,000 pounds of tension. The doctors in Pineville had wanted to take the whole hand. Jake had told them exactly what they could do with their bone saw, and he had learned to work with what remained. He counted each strike of the axe. 1, 2, 3, a rhythm he had followed every morning for 5 years, ever since he had walked away from the timber camps and built this cabin at the end of nowhere. No neighbors within 5 miles. No questions. No memories riding in on Sunday mornings with casseroles and sympathy. Just Jake, his dog, and the mountains that asked nothing of him. Copper exploded into the clearing like a russet cannonball, skidding to a stop in front of Jake and barking with an urgency that made the hair on Jake's neck stand up. The red-boned coonhound was no longer young, maybe 8 or 9 years old by Jake's reckoning, but he moved with the intensity of a dog half his age when something mattered. The dog's whole body vibrated with tension, his tail stiff, his eyes locked on his master's face. Jake set down the axe. "What is it, boy?" Copper spun in a tight circle, barked 3 more times, then bolted back toward the trail. 10 feet away, he stopped, looked back, and barked again. The message was clear. Come now. Right now. No time. Jake grabbed his rifle from inside the cabin door and followed. The Blue Ridge Trail was all loose shale and switchbacks, the kind of path that punished carelessness. Jake climbed fast, his boots finding purchase where the stone allowed, the rifle slung across his back. His breath came hard in the thin mountain air. Copper ranged ahead, checking back every few seconds to make sure Jake was following, his whines high and anxious. They crested the ridge 15 minutes later. Copper stood 50 yards out, circling something in the dirt beneath a massive oak tree. Even from a distance, Jake could see the color. Dark red against pale dust and gold leaves. Too much of it, spreading like a stain that would not wash. Jake moved forward, rifle ready, scanning the rocks and tree line for ambush. Bandits worked these mountains sometimes. Worse things than bandits, too. But there was nothing. Just wind, stone, and the relentless afternoon sun hammering down on a woman who was not moving. She lay on her side beneath the oak, one arm flung out as if she had tried to catch herself when she fell. Her dress had been calico once, pale blue with small flowers, the kind young women wore to church. Now it was torn and filthy, soaked black-red across the bodice. Her feet were bare and bloody, cut to ribbons from running. Rope burns circled both wrists, raw and weeping. And high on her left shoulder, just below the collarbone, was a bullet hole. Jake dropped to one knee beside her and pressed 2 fingers to her throat. There, faint and thready, but there, a pulse. Her eyes cracked open, just a sliver, gray-green, like winter creek water, unfocused. Her lips moved without sound at first, then barely a whisper. "Don't." Jake leaned closer. "Don't what?" "Don't take me back." Then her eyes rolled up, and she was gone again, consciousness slipping away like water through fingers. Jake looked up at the sky, where 2 buzzards circled with the patience of undertakers. He looked at Copper, who sat perfectly still now, watching him with those unblinking dark eyes that seemed to understand everything. Jake made his decision in the space of 3 heartbeats. He shrugged out of his coat, wrapped it carefully around the woman, and lifted her. She weighed nothing. 90 pounds, soaking wet, maybe less. He could feel her ribs through the fabric, the sharp edges of a body that had been starved as much as shot. Her head lolled against his shoulder, long black hair matted with blood and dirt. The hair was braided in the Apache style, and when Jake looked closer, he saw the high cheekbones, the brown skin, the torn remnants of what might have been traditional clothing beneath the ruined calico dress. Thunder rumbled in the distance, a promise the sky might actually keep. Jake started walking. Copper ranged ahead, checking the trail, and together they descended into the gap as the first cold drops began to fall. Jake kicked the cabin door open and carried her straight to his bed, the only bed, a narrow corn-husk mattress that had not been made in a week. He laid her down gentle, peeled back the coat, and assessed the damage by lamplight. The bullet had gone clean through, entry high on the front, exit slightly lower on the back. It had missed the lung by inches, but the bleeding had not stopped, and infection could kill just as sure as lead. Jake built up the fire, set water to boil, and pulled out the battered tin box he kept under the sideboard. Inside were needle and catgut, a bottle of whiskey that had never been for drinking, clean cotton rags boiled so many times they were soft as silk, and a small cloth bag of golden seal root, the yellow herb mountain folk had used for wounds since before white men came to these hills. He washed his hands, both of them, even the ruined one, scrubbing until the skin was raw. Then he went to work. He cleaned the wound with whiskey, the sharp smell filling the cabin. The woman woke twice. The first time she screamed, a raw sound that tore at something in Jake's chest he thought he had buried years ago. The second time she just wept, silent tears tracking through the dust on her face. "I know," Jake said quietly, his voice rough from disuse. He had not spoken to another human in 3 months. "I know it hurts. Almost done." When he finished stitching both wounds and packing them with golden seal paste, he bandaged her tight, dressed her in one of his old flannel shirts, and covered her with every blanket he owned. Then he sat in the chair by the fire, rifle across his knees, and watched the door. Copper curled up at the foot of the bed, nose pointed toward the woman, keeping guard. Outside, the rain came down hard, washing blood from stone, filling the gap with the sound of water running cold and clean through ancient rock. She slept through the night and all the next day. Jake kept the fire going, changed her bandages when blood soaked through, and dribbled water between her lips whenever she would take it. He did not sleep. Every sound outside, wind in the eaves, a branch scraping the roof, the distant cry of a fox, put him on edge. Whoever had done this to her might come looking. On the second morning, her eyes opened and stayed that way. Jake was at the stove, frying eggs in bacon grease, when he heard her move. He turned, spatula still in hand, and found her sitting up, pale as winter ash, staring at him with those gray-green eyes. "Easy," he said. "You lost a lot of blood." She looked down at herself. His shirt hung loose on her thin frame, the bandages visible at the collar. Her hands rested on the quilt like she did not quite trust them. Then she looked at Copper, who wagged his tail once, cautious. "Where am I?" Her voice was scraped raw, and there was an accent Jake could not quite place. English, but shaped by another tongue. "My place, Pine Ridge, about 15 miles south of Cumberland Falls." "How long?" 2 days." She closed her eyes. For a moment, Jake thought she might pass out again, but when they reopened, something harder lived in them, something that had made decisions. "They will come," she said. "Who?" She did not answer right away. She pulled the quilt tighter around her shoulders and stared at the fire like it might hold answers the world did not. "Men who think they own things," she said finally. "Things that do not belong to them." Jake turned off the stove and walked over. He did not sit on the bed. That felt like too much. But he crouched beside it, meeting her eyes at level. "I'm going to ask you 3 questions. You do not have to answer any of them. But if you do, I need the truth. Understood?" She nodded. "What is your name?" "Ayana." "Who shot you?" Her jaw tightened. "A man named Silas Blackwood. He runs timber operations north of here, up near the Kentucky line. Big company, Blackwood Timber." She paused. "He also runs other things. Girls." The word hung in the air between them like smoke. "Girls," Jake repeated, his voice flat. "He buys them, trades for them, takes them when nobody is looking, keeps them in camps behind the mill, says they are working off debts or contracts, whatever lie makes it sound legal." She met his eyes. "I was traded. My father owed money. Blackwood said he would clear the debt if I came to work for him. I was 18. I had no choice." "How long?" 3 years." 3 years. Jake's hands curled into fists, the ruined one aching. "And the bullet?" "I ran." Her voice was empty now, scraped clean. "Took a horse from the stable, rode hard. Thought I could make it to Bourbon Creek, across into Cherokee territory where Blackwood has no jurisdiction. His men caught me 10 miles out." She touched the bandage at her shoulder. "Blackwood said I needed to learn, so he shot me himself. Then he told his men to tie me up, take me past the ridge, and let the wilderness finish what he started." Silence settled over the cabin like fresh snow. Jake stood slowly and walked to the window. The sky was clear now, scrubbed blue and innocent. "Last question," he said, without turning around. "What do you want to do?" "I want to disappear," Ayana said quietly. "I want to vanish so completely that Silas Blackwood spends the rest of his life wondering if I am dead or if I am out there somewhere, waiting. I want him to never sleep right again." Jake turned back. "That is not disappearing. That is war." "Then I want war." He studied her for a long moment. This half-dead woman, in his shirt, with rope burns on her wrists and a bullet hole in her shoulder, asking for the one thing he had spent 5 years trying to avoid. Then he nodded. "All right. But first you eat, you heal, and you get strong. Because if Blackwood comes, and I think he will, you are going to need to stand on your own 2 feet." Agreed. Jake went back to the stove, cracked 4 more eggs into the pan, and started cooking. Copper padded over to Ayana and rested his chin on the edge of the bed. She reached out with her good hand and scratched behind his crooked ear. "He found you," Jake said over his shoulder. "On the ridge. Came and got me." Ayana looked down at the dog, at his scarred muzzle, and the eyes that had seen enough to stop trusting easy. "Thank you," she whispered. Copper's tail thumped twice against the floor. Outside, a crow landed on the fence post and cawed once, harsh and What Jake found on that ridge was about to pull him out of isolation and into battle with the most dangerous man in the Cumberland Gap. What he did not know yet was that saving Ayana would teach him that some promises are worth dying for, and that the ones we keep for strangers matter just as much as the ones we break for ourselves. Over the next week, Ayana healed in inches. Jake changed her bandages every morning and evening, his touch clinical and efficient, careful not to meet her eyes while his hands worked. The wound was clean, no fever, no infection, but it would scar. A puckered star on the front, a ragged exit on the back. Permanent reminders that someone had tried to erase her and failed. She did not talk much at first, just watched. Watched Jake split wood with methodical precision, despite the missing fingers. Watched him cook, clean, mend tack, oil the rifle he kept by the door. Watched the way Copper shadowed him everywhere, a silent partnership built on something deeper than commands. On the 4th day, she stood, wobbly, pale, but upright. On the 5th, she walked to the porch and back. On the 6th, she asked for real clothes. Jake dug through an old trunk and found canvas trousers he had outgrown, a flannel shirt that had belonged to someone he did not talk about, and a belt with 2 new holes punched to make it fit. She dressed behind a hanging quilt he rigged for privacy, and when she emerged, she looked like a ranch hand's younger brother, small, lean, drowned in fabric. "Better," she said. "You will need boots," Jake replied. "Can't do much barefoot." "I had boots. They took them." "I will ride into town tomorrow, get you a pair." "No." She crossed her arms, wincing slightly at the pull. "I am not letting you spend money on me. I will work it off, however long it takes." "You can't work with a hole in your shoulder." "Then I will work when I can." She met his eyes. "I am not charity, Mr. McAllister. I am not some broken thing you found that you get to fix and feel good about. I pay my debts." Jake set down the harness he was mending. "I did not ask for payment." "I know. That is why I am offering." They stared at each other across the cabin. 2 people who had learned the hard way that kindness usually came with conditions, that debts were weapons, that trust was the fastest way to get hurt. Finally, Jake nodded. "All right, but the boots come first. Work comes after you can stand a full day without going white." "Deal." That night, after Ayana had fallen asleep in the bed and Jake had settled into his usual chair by the fire, Copper came and sat at his feet. The dog looked up at him with those unreadable eyes. "I know," Jake murmured. "I know this is a bad idea." Copper's tail thumped once against the floor. "She is going to bring trouble right to the door." Another thump. and we are going to let her stay anyway." The dog yawned, showing every tooth, then curled up by the hearth and closed his eyes. Jake leaned back, rifle across his lap, and watched the darkness press against the windows. Somewhere out there, north of here, a man named Silas Blackwood was probably sitting in a big house drinking expensive whiskey, certain that the Apache girl who ran was rotting in the wilderness by now. Let him think that. Let him sleep easy. Because when the truth came for him, the way all debts eventually came due, it was going to have teeth. The stranger appeared on the 8th day. Jake saw him from the ridge while checking the fence line. A single rider, moving slow, following the creek bed from the north. He sat tall in the saddle, dark hat pulled low, and even from a distance there was something deliberate about the way he moved. Not lost, not passing through, looking. Jake whistled low. Copper materialized from the brush, hackles already rising. "Home," Jake said quietly. "Now." They moved fast, cutting through the ravine trail, boots and paws, finding the path by memory. By the time they hit the valley floor, Jake could see the cabin and Ayana hanging laundry on the line he had strung between two posts, moving careful but steady. "Inside," he called. She turned, saw his face, and did not argue. The wet clothes dropped. She was through the door in 5 seconds. Jake reached the cabin, grabbed the rifle, and checked the load. 6 rounds. He had more ammunition in the sideboard, but 6 would have to be enough for whatever this was. "Who is it?" Ayana asked from the window, staying low the way he had taught her. "Do not know yet." The rider came into the clearing slow, hands visible, reins loose. He stopped 30 feet from the porch and tipped his hat back just enough to show his face. Weathered, maybe 45, with a scar running from his left eye to his jaw like someone had opened his face with a knife and let it heal crooked. "Afternoon," he called. Jake stepped onto the porch, rifle held casual but ready. "Help you?" "Looking for a girl, young, dark hair about this tall." He held his hand level with his shoulder. "Ran off from the Blackwood operation week or so back. Boss is offering a reward for information." "Have not seen anyone." The rider smiled, but it did not reach his eyes. "That is funny, because I tracked a horse this direction. Lost the trail in the rain, but the last clear prints pointed straight at this gap." "Lot of horses use this trail." Sure they do." The man shifted in his saddle, his gaze sliding past Jake to the cabin windows. "Mind if I water my horse? Long ride out here." Jake nodded toward the far side of the yard. "Trough is over there. Help yourself." The man dismounted, led his horse to the trough, and let it drink. But his eyes never stopped moving, taking in the cabin, the barn, the wet laundry scattered in the dirt. Every detail filed away. "Nice place you got here," he said. "Quiet." "That is the idea." "Live alone?" "That is my business." The rider straightened, wiping his hands on his trousers. "Look, friend, I do not want trouble. Just doing a job. If the girl came through here, all you gotta do is say so. Blackwood will pay fair, and we all go home happy." "And if I did see her?" Jake asked. "What then?" "Then we collect her, take her back where she belongs, and everybody forgets this happened." "Where she belongs?" "She is under contract, signed legal. Blackwood has got the papers." Jake's finger rested light on the trigger guard. "A lot of things are legal. Does not make them right." The rider's smile faded. He looked at Jake for a long moment, taking in the rifle, the scars, the hard set of a man who had decided something and was not going to move. "You are making a mistake," he said quietly. "Would not be my first." The man mounted up, turned his horse. "Blackwood is patient, but he does not forget. You think about that." He rode out the way he had come, slow and easy, disappearing into the sage and shadow. Jake stood on the porch until the hoofbeats faded completely. Then he went inside, locked the door, and pulled the shutters closed on every window. Ayana sat at the table, hands folded, face pale. He knows. He suspects. It is not the same thing. "Then we prepare," she said, "because suspicion is one thing, proof is another, and they do not have proof unless they come through that door." Jake set the rifle on the table and sat down across from her. "And if they do?" She met his eyes. Winter Creek water meeting stone. "Then they better come hard, because I do not plan on losing." Outside, Copper barked once, sharp and certain. The all clear. But the message was delivered. Blackwood knew where to find them now. The clock had started counting down. The next morning, Jake woke Ayana before dawn. "Time to learn," he said. They walked to the clearing behind the cabin, where Jake had set up 6 tin cans on a fallen log. 20 paces out, the rising sun caught the metal, turning rust into something almost gold. Jake pulled his Colt revolver from his belt. "This is a single-action army. 6 rounds, .45 caliber. Kick like a mule if you do not respect it, but it will put a man down and keep him there." He handed it to her, grip first. "Feel the weight." Ayana took it. The metal was cold and heavy, more real than anything she had held in 3 years. "Now stance, feet shoulder width, knees soft. Weight forward on the balls of your feet. You lock your knees and the recoil will knock you flat." She adjusted her position. "Good. Now bring the gun up. Support hand wrapped over your strong hand. Thumbs forward, not crossed." Ayana raised the pistol. Her arms shook slightly. "Breathe," Jake said, standing beside her. "In through your nose, out through your mouth. Slow. The gun does not care if you are scared. It only cares if you are steady." She breathed. In, out. In, out. The shaking eased. Sight picture. Line up the front sight between the rear notches. Put that front sight on the target, middle of the can. Do not yank the trigger. Squeeze it gentle, like you are holding something that might break if you rush. Ayana squeezed. The gun roared, bucked hard against her palms. The bullet went wide, kicking up dirt 3 feet to the right of the log. "Again," Jake said. She fired. Wide left. Again. Wide high. Again. The 4th shot clipped the edge of the log, sending splinters flying. The 5th went, God knew where. The 6th hit the 2nd can dead center, punching through with a sharp clang that echoed off the hills. Ayana lowered the pistol, breathing hard, shoulder screaming where the wound pulled. "Not bad," Jake said, "for a first-timer." They walked back to the cabin, Copper trailing behind, nose working the ground for rabbits. Ayana flexed her hands, feeling blisters forming on her palms. "Thank you," she said. Jake shrugged. "Do not thank me yet. Thank me when you are still breathing at the end of this." That afternoon, while Ayana rested and Jake worked on reinforcing the cabin shutters, another rider appeared on the north ridge. Different man this time. Younger, wearing a tan duster and a hat with a silver band that caught the light. He did not come down into the valley, just sat his horse on the ridgeline for maybe 10 minutes, looking, then turned and rode away. Jake watched from the window, jaw tight. "They are watching," Ayana said from the bed. "Yeah, How many you think? 2 so far. Probably got more circling, checking trails, asking questions in town. So we are surrounded? No. Jake let the shutter fall closed. We are fortified. There is a difference. Over the next 3 days, the pattern repeated. Different riders, different times, always staying just beyond rifle range. Watching, cataloging, reporting back. Jake counted 5 distinct men, which meant Blackwood had committed serious resources to this. The training continued. Pistol at dawn, rifle at midday, hand-to-hand in the evening when the light started to fail. Jake taught her how to use elbows and knees, how to go for eyes and throat when size and strength were not on your side. He showed her pressure points, vulnerable spots, ways to turn a man's weight against him. You are never going to outmuscle them, he said, demonstrating a wrist lock that brought Ayana to her knees despite her resistance. So, you outthink them. Be meaner, faster, willing to do what they hesitate to do. Like what? He released her, stepped back. Like whatever it takes to go home standing up. On the 4th night, Jake woke to Copper's low growl. The dog stood at the door, hackles raised, staring at something in the darkness beyond. Jake was on his feet instantly, rifle in hand. What is it? Copper's growl deepened. Ayana sat up, automatically reaching for the pistol Jake had given her to keep by the bed. Someone outside? Stay here. Jake eased the door open, rifle up, scanning the yard. Moonlight painted everything silver and black, all harsh angles and deep shadows. Nothing moved, but Copper was never wrong. Then he smelled it. Smoke. Not wood smoke from the chimney. Something chemical, acrid. Wrong. He ran toward the woodshed, the small structure where he kept split logs and tools. Flames licked up the sides, orange and hungry, fed by something that burned too fast and too hot to be natural. Kerosene. Jake grabbed the water bucket by the trough and doused the flames before they could spread to the cabin. The shed collapsed into charred timber, still smoking. Ayana appeared at his shoulder, pistol raised, scanning the darkness. Where are they? Gone. Jake kicked at the smoldering wreckage. This was not about fighting. This was about sending a message. What message? That they can reach us whenever they want, that nowhere is safe. He looked at the ridgeline, at the shadows that might be rocks or might be men. It is a siege tactic. Make us scared. Make us careless. Is it working? Jake met her eyes. No, but it tells me Blackwood is getting impatient, and impatient men make mistakes. They spent the rest of the night watching from the cabin, taking shifts, waiting for the next move. But nothing came. Just wind and stars, and the slow burn of adrenaline fading into exhaustion. At dawn, Ayana found something nailed to the fence post. A piece of paper, water-stained and torn, with 6 words written in rough pencil. Send her out, or burn together. She brought it inside without comment and handed it to Jake. He read it twice, then fed it to the fire. Well? Ayana asked. Jake pulled on his coat and checked his rifle. We get ready, because talking time is over. They spent the day turning the ranch into a fortress. Jake dug shallow pits around the cabin perimeter, covering them with brush. Ankle breakers that would take a running man down hard. He strung wire across the approach trails at throat height, invisible in the dark. He soaked rags in kerosene and stashed them in strategic locations with matches nearby. If they wanted fire, they would get fire. Ayana worked alongside him, despite the pull in her shoulder, digging, hauling, learning. Jake showed her 3 escape routes he had mapped. A drainage ditch that ran to the creek, a rock chimney that led to the ridge, a tunnel he had started under the barn floor years ago, but never finished. "If things go bad," he said, "you take one of these and you run. Do not stop. Do not look back. Get to Bourbon Creek, find the Cherokee settlements, tell them everything." "What about you?" "I will buy you time." "No." Ayana stopped digging and leaned on the shovel. "We fight together, or we run together. I am not leaving you to die for me." Ayana. "No." Her voice was steel now, tempered by days of practice and nights of fear transformed into fury. "You saved my life. You taught me to fight. You gave me a chance when the whole world said I was not worth the trouble. So do not you dare ask me to run while we are in this together now, and that is how we see it through. We are in this together now, and together is how we see it through." Jake looked at this woman standing in his yard with blistered hands and a loaded pistol on her hip, defying him with the same stubborn courage his sister never got the chance to use. And for the first time in 5 years, something in his chest that had been frozen solid started to crack. "All right," he said quietly. Side by side, they worked until full dark, then collapsed inside, too tired to do more than eat cold beans from the can and drink water that tasted like iron and dust. "How many you think?" Ayana asked, cleaning her pistol by lamplight the way Jake had taught her. "When they come?" 6, maybe 8. Enough to make sure. Not enough to split the reward too many ways." "And we are 2. 2.5. Jake nodded toward Copper, who raised his head at the mention. "Dog is worth at least half a man in a fight." Ayana smiled, despite everything. "Good odds." "Terrible odds." "Then we better be twice as mean." Jake almost laughed. Almost. Instead, he checked his rifle for the 100th time, making sure every mechanism worked smooth, every round seated right. This was it. The waiting was almost over. Soon Blackwood would make his move, and they would find out if all the preparation, all the training, all the bravado was worth a damn when bullets started flying. "Jake," Ayana's voice was soft. "Yeah? If we do not make it, we will make it. But if we do not, I need you to know something." She set down the pistol and met his eyes across the table. "I have spent 3 years feeling like I died the day Blackwood took me. Like I was just walking around waiting for my body to figure it out. But these past 2 weeks, fighting with you, learning to be strong again, I feel alive. Scared, yeah, but alive. And whatever happens tomorrow or the next day, you gave me that. So thank you. For real this time." Jake swallowed hard, words sticking in his throat like burrs. "You gave me something too." "What?" "A reason to care if I wake up tomorrow." The lamp flickered, casting long shadows across the walls. Outside, the wind picked up, carrying the smell of rain that might finally fall. And in the distance, so faint it could have been imagination, came the sound of horses moving in the dark. Copper's ears pricked forward. Jake stood, rifle in hand, moving to the window. Dawn was still hours away, but Blackwood was not waiting. The attack was coming tonight. The attack came from the south. No warning, no final chance to surrender. Just sudden muzzle flash and the crack of rifle fire punching through the pre-dawn darkness like hammer strikes against anvil. Bullets chewed into the cabin walls, shattering one window, splintering the doorframe 6 inches from where Jake had been standing a second before. He dove inside, rolling to the wall. "South side. 3, maybe 4. Ayana was already at the south window, pistol up, tracking movement in the gray light. She saw a figure running toward the barn and fired twice. The first shot tore through empty air. The second caught him in the leg, spinning him down into the dust where he lay screaming. More gunfire erupted from the north. Jake crawled to the opposite window, thrust the rifle barrel through, and fired at the muzzle flashes. Someone yelled, the voice cutting off sharp. Hit or pinned, Jake could not tell. "They are spreading out," Ayana shouted over the gunfire, "trying to surround us." "Let them try." Jake fired again, working the lever, brass casing spinning through the air. "Just keep them off the walls." A man broke from cover near the creek, running hard for the cabin's blind spot on the east side. Copper launched from the porch like a russet missile, snarling, and hit the runner at full speed. They went down in a tangle of teeth and thrashing limbs. The man screamed, trying to bring his pistol around, but Copper had his gun arm in those powerful jaws and was not letting go. Jake put a round into the dirt beside them. "Call your dog off, or the next one is in your skull." The man went still. Copper dragged him backward by the arm, never releasing his grip, hauling him away from the cabin like a wolf with prey. "Good boy," Jake muttered, then turned back to the window as more bullets ripped through the morning air. The fight settled into a brutal rhythm: advance, fire, retreat, reload. Blackwood's men were professionals, moving with coordination, using cover, trying to work close enough to rush the cabin. But every approach met bullets or traps or Copper's teeth, and slowly, reluctantly, they pulled back to regroup. In the brief silence that followed, Jake counted casualties. 1 man down from Ayana's shot, still moaning in the dirt. 1 disabled by Copper, crawling toward the tree line with a mangled arm. At least 1 more hit, judging by the blood trail leading into the sage. "That is 3, Ayana said, reloading with hands that barely shook. 5 left, plus Blackwood. They will come again, harder this time. Let them." Jake looked at her crouched by the window, face smudged with powder smoke, eyes hard as winter stone. This was not the half-dead woman Copper had found bleeding in the dust 2 weeks ago. This was someone who had crawled through hell and come out forged into something that cut back. The second assault came fast and mean. 2 men rushed the north side, while 3 opened fire from the south, pouring lead into the cabin in a coordinated barrage meant to keep heads down. Jake heard wood splintering, glass breaking, bullets punching through the walls close enough to feel the air move. He rolled to the north window, saw the runners closing fast. 20 yards, 15. He fired, levered, fired again. The lead man dropped, clutching his chest. The second dove behind the water trough and returned fire, bullets sparking off the iron stove. Ayana's pistol roared from the south side. "Got one. 2 left on this angle." "Watch the east," Jake shouted, reloading. "They are trying to flank." The door exploded inward, torn half off its hinges by a shotgun blast. A man stepped through the smoke, leveling his weapon for a second shot. Jake did not think, just moved. He threw himself sideways as the shotgun roared again, pellets shredding the wall where he had been. His rifle came up, and he fired from the hip, pure instinct. The shotgunner went down like someone had cut his strings. But the door was open now, the barrier breached. Ayana spun, saw the danger, and made a decision. She grabbed the kerosene lamp from the table and hurled it at the doorway. Glass shattered. Fuel splashed across the threshold. And when Jake fired a round into the spreading pool, it ignited with a whoosh that sent flames racing up the doorframe. "Back door!" Jake yelled, grabbing her arm. "Move!" They ran through the cabin's interior as fire began to eat the front wall. Jake kicked open the back door, and they spilled into the narrow space behind the cabin, where the drainage ditch offered cover and an escape route if they needed it. Bullets kicked up dirt at their heels. Jake dropped to one knee, aimed, fired. One attacker folded. Ayana's pistol spoke twice, 3 times. The other man stumbled, but kept coming. Copper appeared from the shadows, jaws still dark from the last fight, and hit the man from the side, jaws closing on his wrist, dragging him down. The man screamed, trying to shake the dog loose, but Copper had locked on, and nothing short of death would make him release. Jake led them to an outcropping 50 yards out, a natural fortress of stone that offered cover and high ground. They scrambled up, breathing hard, and turned to face the burning cabin. Through the smoke and flames, a figure sat his horse, watching. Even from this distance, even through the haze, Jake could see the expensive coat, the way he sat like a king, surveying property he already owned. Silas Blackwood had come to watch his men finish the job. From the outcrop, Jake counted heads. 4 men still standing, regrouping near the tree line. 3 dead or 2 wounded to fight. The arithmetic was shifting. Blackwood saw them in the rocks and raised his voice to Carey. "You cannot run forever, McAllister. This territory is mine. Every trail, every town, every rock you hide behind. I will hunt you to the ends of the earth before I let you make me look weak." Jake aimed the rifle at Blackwood's center mass, finger on the trigger. 1 shot. He could end this right now. But 60 yards was long for a rifle when adrenaline made hands shake. And if he missed, Blackwood would disappear, and they would never get another chance this clean. Ayana must have read his thoughts. "Do not yet. We need to see his face when we beat him. We are not exactly winning. We are still breathing. That is winning." Below, Blackwood issued orders Jake could not hear. The 4 remaining men spread out, moving to surround the outcropping. Professional, methodical, inevitable. "We cannot hold this position," Ayana said quietly. "Not against 4 coming from different angles." "I know. So what do we do?" Jake looked at the burning cabin, at everything he owned, turning to ash and ember. 5 years of solitude, of trying to forget, of pretending he did not care about anything or anyone. All of it gone in 30 minutes of gunfire and flame. And somehow, impossibly, he felt lighter. "We stop defending," he said. "We take the fight to them." He pointed to the north ridge, where the wire traps still waited. "I am going to lead them through there. Get them tangled. Whittle the numbers. You circle south, get above them, take shots when they are focused on me. Copper stays with you, watches your back." "That is insane." "You got a better idea?" Ayana opened her mouth, closed it. "No. Damn it. No, I do not." "Then on 3 we split. Do not hesitate. Do not look back. Just move and shoot and trust that I am doing the same." She grabbed his arm, pulled him around to face her. For a moment they just looked at each other. 2 broken people who had stumbled into each other's lives by accident and stayed by choice. "Do not die," Ayana said fiercely. "Same to you." 1. Jake checked the rifle loads. 2. Ayana gripped her pistol so hard her knuckles went white. 3. They exploded from the rocks in opposite directions. Jake ran north, boots pounding stone, heading for the ridge trail. Behind him, gunfire erupted as Blackwood's men reacted, but he was already moving, using terrain, putting distance between himself and their guns. He hit the ridge trail at full speed and kept climbing. Behind him, he heard shouts, orders, the sound of men giving chase. Good. Let them follow. Let them think he was running scared. The first wire trap was strung between 2 rocks at shin height. Jake vaulted it clean and kept running. Behind him, someone was not so lucky. A man's scream, A heavy crash, cursing. One down. The second trap was higher, throat level, meant for a running man. Jake slid under it on his back and came up shooting. The rifle roared, buckshot from a dropped shotgun he had grabbed, shredding the brush where movement had been. Someone grunted, stumbled, but kept coming. Jake ran deeper into the wire maze, leading them through traps he had set and memorized, turning their numbers into a liability. Another scream, another curse, the sound of thrashing as someone caught in wire tried to free themselves. Then a voice, Blackwood's voice, cutting through the chaos. "Forget him. The girl is still in the rocks. Take her alive and McAllister will surrender." No. No. Jake reversed direction, running flat out back down the ridge. He burst from the rocks in time to see two men closing on Ayana's position from opposite sides, pinning her, cutting off her escape. She fired, dropped one, but the other kept coming, using his partner's fall as cover to close the distance. 10 yards. 5. Jake raised the rifle, but the angle was wrong. Ayana too close. If he missed, copper came out of nowhere, a gray blur of fur and fury, hitting the man at the knees. They went down hard, and the dog's jaws found throat, clamped down, and did not let go. Even when the man's pistol fired wildly, bullets going everywhere and nowhere. Ayana scrambled up, ran to Jake's position. Blood streaked her left arm. Grazed, not serious, but bleeding. "You hit?" "Just a scratch." "You still standing?" "I am still standing." They turned back to back, covering all angles as the remaining men regrouped. Jake counted. 2 still mobile, plus Blackwood. 3 against 2. Better odds than they had started with. But the sun was climbing now, burning off the smoke, revealing their position. No more shadows to hide in, no more tricks, just open ground and the final reckoning. Silas Blackwood dismounted slowly, deliberately, drawing a long-barreled revolver from his belt. Custom piece, engraved, expensive, a rich man's gun. 3 years I kept her, Blackwood said, walking forward. 3 years I fed her, clothed her, gave her a roof. And this is the gratitude I get. Running, shooting my men, burning my property. She was never your property, Jake said, standing. Everything is my property if I decide it is. Blackwood stopped 20 feet away. That is how the world works, McAllister. Men like me own. Men like you serve. And girls like her? He looked past Jake to where Ayana stood. Girls like her exist to please whoever has the power to take them. Ayana stepped forward, pistol raised, arm steady despite the blood, despite the fear, despite everything. I am not yours, she said clearly. I never was. And when they find your body in the dirt, Silas Blackwood, they will know that is true. Blackwood's face twisted. You ungrateful little... He raised his gun. Ayana fired first. The bullet caught Blackwood high on the right shoulder, spinning him sideways. His shot went wild, kicking dirt 5 feet from its target. He stumbled, caught himself, face contorted with shock and rage. You shot me, he said, like he could not quite believe it. You actually... Jake's rifle spoke once. The heavy round took Blackwood in the chest, punching through expensive coat and flesh and bone. The man who thought he owned the world dropped to his knees in the red Tennessee dust. He looked up at them, blood on his lips, understanding finally reaching his eyes. You do not get to walk away from this. "Neither do you," Ayana said. She walked forward, standing over him, pistol aimed at his head. Blackwood stared up at her, seeing his death in the face of the woman he had tried to break. "Do it," he rasped. "Finish it." Ayana's finger tightened on the trigger. For a long moment the world balanced on that edge. Revenge and justice, death and mercy. The choice that would define who she became after today. Then she lowered the gun. "No," she said quietly. "I am not giving you an easy death. I want you to live. I want you to spend whatever time you have left knowing that a woman you tried to own beat you. That she walked away free while you bled out in the dirt like the nothing you are." She turned her back on him and walked to where Jake stood. Behind them, Silas Blackwood collapsed forward into the dust, still breathing, but finished, his empire crumbling around him with every fading heartbeat. The remaining gunmen were gone, fled or dead, scattered to the wind. The cabin still burned, sending black smoke into the clear morning sky like a signal fire visible for miles. Jake and Ayana stood together, watching it burn, neither speaking, just breathing, just alive. Copper limped over, favoring his right foreleg, but tail wagging. Ayana dropped to her knees and hugged him, burying her face in his fur. The dog tolerated it with patient dignity. "It is over," she whispered. Jake looked at the ruins, at the bodies, at the blood soaking into earth that had seen too much of it. "Yeah," he said, "it is over." But even as he said it, he knew the truth was more complicated. The fight was over. The war was over. But what came next? Rebuilding, healing, learning to live with what they had done and what had been done to them. That was just beginning. And this time, impossibly, neither of them would face it alone. But first, they had to survive what came next. Because smoke like that drew attention for miles, and questions would follow soon behind. The smoke climbed higher, visible for 20 miles in every direction. A black column that told the territory something had happened at Pine Ridge, something violent and final. Within hours, riders would come to investigate. Marshals, maybe, or opportunists looking to pick the bones. Either way, Jake and Ayana could not be here when they arrived. Blackwood's body lay in the dirt where he had fallen, chest still now, eyes staring sightless at the morning sky. Dead within minutes of their confrontation. The men who had fled into the hills would not be back, not without their leader, not with 3 dead and 2 more bleeding out in the sage. The battle was won. But standing in the ashes of everything Jake had built over 5 years of solitude, victory tasted like copper and dust. "We need to move," he said, voice rough from smoke and shouting. "Gather what we can carry. Food, ammunition, blankets. We have got maybe 2 hours before someone shows up asking questions we do not want to answer." Ayana nodded, still kneeling beside Copper, her hands gentle on his injured leg. "Can he travel?" Jake crouched down, running careful fingers over the dog's foreleg. Sprained, maybe cracked, but not broken. "He can walk. Not far, not fast. We will have to go slow." "Where are we going?" Good question. Fort Casper was closest, but also the first place anyone would look. North meant Montana, and more Blackwood territory. Men loyal to the Empire, even if the Emperor was dead. South meant crossing open prairie, with winter coming on. West led deeper into the mountains, into land so wild even the trappers avoided it in cold months. Jake stood, surveying the ruins. The barn still stood, scorched but intact. Inside were his saddlebags, the ones he had stashed emergency supplies in years ago when paranoia was sharper than hope. $20 in gold coins, dried venison, fishhooks, matches. Not much to start over with, but more than nothing. "West," he said finally. "Into the high country. There is an old trapper's cabin I used once, back when I was running freight through the passes. Remote, defendable. Nobody knows about it except me and the bears."
"How far?"
3 days on foot if we push, 5 if the weather turns. Ayana looked down at Copper, at the blood on her own arm, at Jake's face, lined with exhaustion. "Then we better start walking." They salvaged what they could from the barn: dried meat, hardtack, a canvas tarp that could serve as shelter. Jake retrieved his saddlebags from where he had hidden them under the floorboards, grateful he had been paranoid enough to prepare for the day everything went to hell. Inside were the gold coins, a small pot, and the last photograph he owned, a tintype of his sister Emma, taken a month before she died. He looked at it for 3 seconds, then tucked it back in the bag. Some ghosts you carried, some you left behind. He was still figuring out which was which. Ayana found a canteen, filled it from the pump that somehow still worked, and slung it over her shoulder. She looked at the pistol on her hip, then at the rifle Jake handed her. "I killed a man today." "Yeah, he was trying to kill me." "Yeah? Does it get easier?" Jake met her eyes. "No. It just becomes something you live with." She nodded slowly, accepting the weight of what she had become. "Good. I do not want it to get easier." They worked in silence, efficient, not talking about the bodies or the burning cabin or the man dying in the dirt behind them. Just packing what they needed to survive the next 3 days, and trusting that 3 days from now they could worry about the day after that. Copper limped over to where Jake stood, favoring his injured leg but determined to move. Jake rigged a makeshift sling from the canvas tarp, and between him and Ayana, they could carry the dog when he could not walk. It was not elegant, but it would work. Sam Weatherby appeared at first light, helping them salvage what little remained. When they were ready to leave, the old mountain man clasped Jake's shoulder. "I will spread word you headed south toward Fort Casper," he said quietly. "Buy you time." Jake nodded his thanks, understanding the gift of misdirection. They left as the sun climbed higher, 3 figures moving through sage and stone, heading west toward the mountains that rose like broken teeth against the sky. Behind them, the smoke continued to rise, marking the place where Ayana had died and been reborn, where Jake had finally stopped running from the past and started fighting for a future. The first day was hard. Copper's leg worsened by mid-afternoon, forcing them to stop every hour to rest. Ayana's wounded arm stiffened, making it difficult to carry her pack. Jake's back screamed where the old bullet wound lived, each step a reminder that he was not 20 anymore, that the body kept accounts the mind tried to ignore. But they pushed on, following deer trails and creek beds, staying off the main routes where Blackwood's surviving men might be lurking. They saw no one. The territory was vast, empty, indifferent to human drama. By nightfall, they had covered maybe 8 miles, less than Jake had hoped, more than he had feared. They made camp in a hollow between 2 ridges, sheltered from wind, with a spring trickling nearby. Jake built a tiny fire, barely enough to heat water, nothing that would show for miles. They ate cold venison and hardtack, washing it down with spring water so cold it hurt their teeth. "Tell me about this cabin we are heading to," Ayana said, wrapping herself in the tarp against the dropping temperature. Jake fed small sticks to the fire, watching sparks spiral into darkness. Belonged to a French trapper named Beaumont. He worked these mountains for 20 years, trapping beaver and marten, trading with the Shoshone. One winter, he did not come back to Fort Bridger. Rangers found him the next spring, frozen in his cabin, surrounded by a season's worth of pelts he never got to sell. That is cheerful. Point is, the cabin is solid.
Stone foundation, good roof, positioned where the mountains block the worst storms. Beaumont knew what he was doing. If we can make it there, we can winter over, heal up, figure out what comes next. Ayana was quiet for a moment, staring into the tiny flames. And then what? Spring comes? We just walk back into civilization like nothing happened? Blackwood's people will talk. Someone will come asking questions. Let them ask. They will find a burned ranch, some dead men, and no witnesses worth believing. Blackwood's operation was not exactly legal. A lot of people will be happy to see him gone, will not look too hard at how it happened. You hope? Yeah, I hope. Ayana pulled the tarp tighter. If you are wrong, if trouble finds us, we deal with it same as we dealt with Blackwood? Together. That word again. Together. It had become their answer to everything, the foundation they built on, when nothing else was certain. Copper limped over and collapsed between them, exhausted, trusting them to keep watch while he slept. Ayana reached out and scratched behind his ears. We owe him everything, she said softly. If he had not found me, if he had not brought you, he did. That is what matters. I want to do something for him when we get to the cabin, something to thank him. Jake smiled, rare and genuine. He is a dog. Give him a warm place to sleep and a full belly. He will think he died and went to heaven. Still, he deserves something special. They took turns on watch that night, 2 hours each, though neither slept much. Every sound brought them alert. Wind in the rocks, a distant coyote, the rustle of some small creature in the brush. The aftermath of battle lived in their nerves, adrenaline that would not fade, the body's refusal to believe the danger had passed. Dawn came cold and gray, promising rain. They broke camp fast, buried the fire, and moved out before full light. Jake's knee had stiffened overnight, making him limp almost as bad as Copper. Ayana saw it, but did not mention it, just adjusted her pace to match his without comment. Small kindnesses mattered more than grand gestures out here. The second day was worse. Rain came at mid-morning, cold and steady, soaking through their clothes, turning the ground to slick mud. Copper's limp became pronounced, forcing more frequent stops. By afternoon, the dog was barely walking, just standing wherever Jake set him down, eyes apologetic. We cannot push him anymore, Ayana said, kneeling in the mud beside Copper. He needs rest. We are still 6, maybe 7 miles from the cabin, cannot stop here in the open. Then I will carry him. Jake looked at her wounded arm, at the exhaustion in her face, at the determination that would not quit. You can barely carry yourself. Then we both carry him. Take turns. Whatever it takes. She met his eyes. He did not leave me to die. I am not leaving him. So they did. Jake rigged the sling properly this time, and they took turns carrying Copper across their shoulders like a haunch of venison. The dog tolerated it with patient dignity, understanding, somehow, that they were helping, that the pain in his leg made this necessary. The rain continued, turning the world gray and formless. They climbed higher into the mountains, following a trail Jake remembered more by feel than sight. The trees changed from sage to pine. The air thinned, and their breath started to fog. Winter was coming to the high country earlier than usual, chasing them toward shelter. By the time they spotted the cabin, twilight was falling, and they were both stumbling with exhaustion. It sat in a small valley, backed against a cliff face, surrounded by pine and aspen. Stone walls, split log roof, a single window facing south to catch what sun the mountains allowed. Exactly as Jake remembered. They staggered the last 100 yards, and Jake kicked the door open, half expecting to find Beaumont's skeleton still sitting by the cold hearth. But the cabin was empty, just bare walls and a dirt floor, and the lingering smell of old smoke. Someone had been here since Beaumont died, cleaned it out, left it ready for the next desperate soul who needed shelter. Ayana collapsed against the wall, sliding down to sit in the dirt, breathing like she had run miles. Jake lowered Copper gently to the floor, and the dog immediately curled up and closed his eyes, done with walking for the foreseeable future. "We made it," Ayana whispered. Jake stood in the doorway, looking back the way they had come. No lights, no fires, no signs of pursuit. Just rain and darkness and the vast indifference of mountains that had seen 1,000 human dramas and would see 1,000 more. "Yeah," he said, "we made it." Over the next 3 days, they transformed the cabin from bare shelter into something resembling a home. Jake repaired the roof where weather had opened gaps, stuffing moss and bark into cracks. Ayana cleaned the interior, sweeping out years of debris, scrubbing the hearth until it was ready for fire. Together they gathered firewood, enough to last a month if they were careful, stacking it against the north wall where it would stay dry. Copper's leg improved with rest. By the 3rd day, he was putting weight on it again, limping around the cabin's perimeter, establishing territory, marking trees with the seriousness of a dog who had decided this was home now. Ayana's arm healed too. Jake cleaned the wound each evening, watching pink, healthy flesh replace damaged tissue. No infection, no fever. She was young, strong, resilient in ways that still surprised him. The bullet scar on her shoulder was settling into a permanent mark, raised and pale against her skin, a reminder she would carry forever. "Does it bother you?" she asked one evening, catching him looking while he changed the bandage. "The scar? Knowing I will always have it?" Jake tied off the clean cloth. "No. It bothers me that you had to get it in the first place. But the scar itself? That is just proof you survived. Nothing wrong with proof." She touched the mark, feeling its shape. "I used to think about scars as ugly things, damage, something to hide. And now? Now I think they are stories. Every mark tells how you lived, what you fought, what tried to kill you and failed." She looked at his ruined hand. "What is your story? You never said how you lost the fingers." Jake flexed the damaged hand, feeling the ghost ache where nerves remembered what was not there anymore. "Worked a timber crew 5 years back. Tree fell wrong during a cut. Steel cable snapped under 10,000 pounds of tension. Choice was let go or lose the hand. I tried to do both, split the difference. Lost 3 fingers and nearly the whole hand before someone cut me free." "Did you finish the job?" "Yeah. Wrapped it in whiskey and rags. Worked the last week. Did not seem right to quit just because it hurt." Ayana smiled, despite everything. "That is the stubbornest thing I have ever heard." "Stubbornness kept me breathing more times than I can count." "Me too." She flexed her wounded arm, testing the range of motion. "When Blackwood's men left me on that ridge to die, I could have just laid there and let it happen. Would have been easier. But something in me refused, kept thinking, not like this. Not in the dirt, like I do not matter. If I am dying, it will be on my feet, fighting." "That is not stubbornness," Jake said quietly. "That is strength. Real strength. The kind that does not quit." She looked at him across the small space of the cabin, firelight painting them both in amber and shadow. "You gave me that. The chance to be strong, instead of just surviving." "No, you always had it. I just gave you room to remember." The silence that followed was comfortable, warm, the quiet understanding of two people who had bled together and knew each other's worth without needing constant proof. Outside, snow began to fall. First flakes of winter coming early, settling on pine branches and turning the world white. Copper barked once at the window, excited by the change, then settled back by the fire. "Looks like we are staying here a while," Ayana observed. Jake moved to the door, looking out at the falling snow. Already an inch had accumulated, and it showed no signs of stopping. "Could be snowed in for weeks once it really starts. You ready for that? Being stuck in a one-room cabin with me and a dog? I have survived worse company." He laughed, surprising himself. When was the last time he had laughed? Before Emma died, probably. Before the world taught him that caring about people just gave fate more ways to hurt you. But here he was, caring anyway. Caring about this woman who had stumbled into his life bleeding and desperate, who had learned to fight like hell, who looked at his scars and saw stories instead of damage. Caring about a dog who had found her when he had given up looking for anything worth finding. The snow fell heavier, building drifts against the cabin walls, sealing them into the high country until spring. And for the first time in 5 years, Jake was not afraid of being trapped. Because being trapped with people who mattered was different from being alone. That night, while Ayana slept and Copper snored by the fire, Jake sat by the window, watching snow transform the landscape into something clean and new. He thought about Blackwood, dead in the dirt by now, picked clean by scavengers or buried by whoever found him first. He thought about the cabin at Pine Ridge, reduced to ash and memory. He thought about Emma, about all the people he had failed to save, all the ghosts that rode his shoulders. And for the first time, he felt them loosen their grip. Not gone. They would never be gone. But quieter. Willing to let him carry someone else's weight for a while. Willing to let him live. The rider appeared on the 3rd week, emerging from the tree line like a ghost materialized from snow and shadow. Jake spotted him from the ridge while checking snares for rabbit. A single figure on horseback, moving careful through drifts that came up to the horse's chest, heading straight for the hidden valley where the cabin sat. Jake whistled low. Copper, whose leg had healed enough for short patrols, came alert beside him. Together they watched the rider descend, and as he got closer, Jake saw the silver badge pinned to his coat. Federal Marshal. The law had found them. They made it back to the cabin in 15 minutes, Jake moving fast, despite the snow. Ayana was inside mending clothes by firelight, and she stood when she saw his face. "Law's coming," Jake said, already grabbing the rifle. "Federal Marshal. One man, but where there's one, there's usually more. Do we run? In this snow? We'd make it maybe 2 miles before we froze." Jake checked the rifle's action, then set it down. "No. We talk. See what he wants. Be ready for anything." The marshal rode into the clearing 10 minutes later. He was maybe 50 years old, weathered, with gray in his beard, and the kind of eyes that had seen too much to be surprised by anything. He stopped his horse 30 feet from the cabin, hands visible on the saddle horn. "Jacob McAllister," he called. Not a question, a statement. Jake stepped onto the porch, unarmed. "That's me." "Name's Henry Clayton, federal marshal out of Fort Casper." He nodded toward the cabin. "Mind if I step down? Been riding 3 days. Could use some coffee if you've got it." Jake studied him. No gun drawn, no backup appearing from the trees, just a tired man asking for hospitality. "Come ahead, but slow." Clayton dismounted, tied his horse, and walked to the porch like a man moving through water. Age and cold had settled into his bones. Up close, Jake could see he was older than 50, maybe pushing 60, with the kind of face that spoke of fairness and principles that didn't bend easy. Inside, Ayana had coffee boiling, the cabin warm from the fire. Clayton removed his hat, nodded to her with genuine respect, and sat at the table Jake indicated. Copper watched from the corner, neither friendly nor hostile, just waiting. "Appreciate the hospitality," Clayton said, wrapping his hands around the tin cup Ayana poured. "That's good coffee." "What brings federal law to the high country in winter?" Jake asked. Clayton took another sip, buying time or gathering thoughts. "Got reports about trouble at Pine Ridge. Cabin burned, bodies found. Man named Silas Blackwood dead from gunshot wounds. 6 of his employees also deceased or badly injured." He looked at Jake. "You know anything about that?" "Might." Blackwood was a prominent businessman. Timber operations, property holdings, had friends in territorial government. His death raises questions. "I imagine it does." Clayton set down the cup. "Here's what I know. Blackwood ran more than timber. Had a trafficking operation. Kept women against their will. Called it contract labor, but it was slavery, plain as day. Been trying to build a case against him for 2 years, but every witness disappeared or recanted. Every judge in his pocket. Every sheriff on his payroll." He looked at Ayana. "Until 3 weeks ago, when someone burned his Pine Ridge operation to the ground and left him bleeding in the dirt." Ayana stood perfectly still, saying nothing. "Found something interesting in Blackwood's office before his associates could clean it out," Clayton continued. "Ledger. Names, dates, purchase prices. Evidence of 47 women trafficked over 8 years. Some of those names matched missing persons reports from as far as Colorado." He pulled a worn notebook from his coat. One of those names was Ayana. "Apache girl, family killed 3 years back near Cumberland Gap. Listed as property, purchased for $300. The cabin was silent except for the crackle of fire and the wind outside. "Now, I could arrest you both," Clayton said quietly. "Bring you back to Pineville. Let a jury decide if killing Blackwood and his men was murder or self-defense. But Pineville's got a new judge, federal appointment, doesn't owe Blackwood anything. And that ledger is evidence of crimes that make what happened at Pine Ridge look like justice, not murder." Jake leaned back in his chair. "So why are you here?" "Because I need testimony. Need victims willing to speak publicly about what Blackwood did. The ledger's evidence, but a trial needs voices. People standing up and saying what happened to them." He looked at Ayana. "You willing to do that?" Ayana's hands were folded on the table, steady. "If I testify, Blackwood's associates will come for me. His empire may be crumbling, but there are still men loyal to him, men who profit from his operations." "That's why I brought federal protection," Clayton said, "and why I need more than one voice. I've been tracking down other names in that ledger. found 4 women willing to testify if they're not alone. Safety in numbers. Witnesses protecting witnesses. Where? Jake asked. Pineville, 3 weeks from now. Gives us time to gather all witnesses, prepare evidence, make sure everything is ironclad. Public trial, open court, everyone in the territory invited to watch. Sunlight's the best disinfectant. Clayton stood. I can't force you, but this is a chance to make sure what Blackwood did gets remembered the right way, not as a simple shooting, but as justice for crimes the law was too corrupt to stop. Ayana looked at Jake. He looked back, and in that glance was everything. The decision was hers. He would stand with whatever she chose, but the choice had to be hers. I'll testify, Ayana said, on one condition. Name it. Jake goes free. No charges, no trial, no questions about what happened at Pine Ridge. He saved my life. Everything he did was to protect me from men who would have killed me. That's not murder, Marshal. That's what the law should have done 3 years ago. Clayton nodded slowly. I can make that happen. Judge I'm working with is a fair man, understands the difference between killing and murder. You testify about Blackwood's trafficking operation. McAllister walks free, and we put an end to this for good. Then we have a deal. They left the cabin 3 days later when the weather cleared. Clayton had brought supplies, extra horses, winter gear that made the journey back to civilization possible. The trail down from the high country took 4 days of hard riding, following routes Clayton knew from 20 years working these mountains. Ayana rode beside Jake, both of them silent, processing what was coming. A public trial meant standing in front of the territory, telling her story, reliving 3 years of imprisonment. It meant seeing Blackwood's associates, the men who had worked for him, the system that had enabled him. But it also meant the chance to make sure it mattered, that her suffering and Emma's death and all the women in that ledger got justice that meant something. They reached Pineville on the 5th day. The town had changed in 3 weeks. Where before Blackwood's timber operations had dominated the landscape, now federal marshals patrolled the streets. The big house where Blackwood had lived was boarded up, seized as evidence. The saloons he'd owned were closed. The mill ran under federal supervision. Workers paid fair wages for the first time in a decade. Clayton took them to a boarding house run by a woman named Ruth Henderson, herself a survivor of Blackwood's operations. She was maybe 35, with hard eyes and harder hands. And when she saw Ayana, she embraced her like a sister. "You're safe here," Ruth said. "I've got 3 other women staying, all testifying. We watch out for each other." That night, around Ruth's table, Ayana met the others. Sarah, 19, taken from a wagon train 2 years back. Marie, 24, sold by her own father to pay gambling debts. Grace, 17, kidnapped from a Cherokee settlement. Each had a story that mirrored Ayana's. Each had survived because they refused to break. "Tomorrow we meet with the judge," Ruth explained. "Get our testimony on record. Then the public trial in 3 days. Whole town will be there, maybe the whole territory. This is our chance to make them see what Blackwood really was." Jake sat in the corner, listening, watching Ayana find her people. Women who understood without explanation, who knew the weight she carried. He had saved her from dying in the wilderness, but these women would help her learn to live after. The next morning, they met Judge Marcus Thornton in his chambers. He was 60 years old, appointed by Washington to clean up territorial corruption, and he listened to each woman's story
with the attention it deserved. When Ayana spoke about her family's murder and her 3 years in Blackwood's camp, Thornton's face remained composed, but his hands gripped the desk hard enough to turn knuckles white. "This will not be easy," Thornton said when they finished. "Blackwood had powerful friends. Some of them will be in that courtroom trying to discredit you, trying to make it seem like you're lying for money or revenge. Can you handle that?" "Yes," Ayana said, no hesitation. "Can you stand in front of 200 people and tell them what was done to you?" "I can, if it means other girls won't have to." Thornton nodded. "Then we do this right."
Full testimony, evidence presented. Blackwood's ledger read into record. By the time we're done, everyone in this territory will know exactly what kind of man Silas Blackwood was. The trial began on a cold January morning, 1893. The courthouse was packed, standing room only, people from 6 counties coming to witness what everyone knew would be the trial of the decade. Blackwood's associates sat in the front row, men in expensive suits with lawyers whispering strategies. But behind them sat the mountain folk, the miners, the farmers, the people who had suffered under Blackwood's empire and wanted to see it buried. Judge Thornton called the court to order, and the room fell silent. "We are here," Thornton began, "to examine the business practices and personal conduct of the late Silas Blackwood. This is not a murder trial. Jacob McAllister and Ayana acted in self-defense against men who intended them harm. This is a trial to establish the truth about trafficking operations that ran for nearly a decade in this territory, and to ensure such operations never take root again." He nodded to the prosecutor, a young federal attorney named Morrison. "Call your first witness." Ruth Henderson took the stand. She testified about being sold to Blackwood by her husband's creditors, about 4 years working his saloons, about watching women disappear who tried to escape. Her voice never wavered. Sarah testified next, then Marie, then Grace. Each woman stood and told her truth, and with each testimony the courtroom grew quieter, the weight of accumulated suffering pressing down on everyone present. Then Ayana took the stand. She wore a simple dress Ruth had given her, her hair braided in the Apache tradition. She looked small in the witness chair, but when she began to speak, her voice carried to every corner of the room. "My name is Ayana. I am Apache of the Mescalero people. 3 years ago, my family was traveling west through Tennessee. We made camp on public land near Cumberland Gap. In the morning, armed men came. They said we were on Blackwood timber property, that we owed payment for trespassing. The courtroom was absolutely still. My father said the land was not marked, that we meant no harm. One of the men shot him, then my mother, then my 2 brothers. They took me because I was young, and Blackwood said I could work off the debt my family owed." Ayana's voice remained steady, matter-of-fact, letting the horror speak for itself. "I was 18 years old. I spent the next 3 years cooking and serving at timber camps. I tried to escape twice. The second time, Blackwood himself shot me and ordered his men to leave me on a ridge to die. That is when Copper found me. That is when Jake saved me." "And what happened when Blackwood came to take you back?" Morrison asked. "Jake said I was not property. Blackwood attacked with 8 armed men. We defended ourselves. Jake is alive because he fought for what was right. I am alive because I refused to go back to slavery." Morrison held up the ledger. "Do you recognize this? That is Blackwood's book. My name is in there. Purchased for $300, like I was livestock." "Thank you." Morrison turned to the judge. Your Honor, the prosecution presents evidence of systematic trafficking, multiple counts of murder, and conspiracy to circumvent federal law. We request that the Blackwood estate be seized, assets distributed to victims, and all associates currently operating trafficking rings be arrested immediately. Blackwood's lawyers tried. They questioned Ayana's memory, suggested she was lying for money, implied Jake was a violent drifter who had manipulated her. But Ayana did not bend. She answered every question with calm precision, and when one lawyer suggested she had voluntarily entered employment, she looked him in the eye and said, "My family was murdered in front of me. Where is the voluntary in that?" The courtroom erupted in applause. Thornton had to bang his gavel for silence. The trial lasted 2 days. On the third day, Thornton delivered his verdict. "Having reviewed testimony and evidence," he said, "this court finds that Silas Blackwood operated a criminal enterprise involving trafficking, murder, fraud, and corruption of public officials. His death at the hands of Jacob McAllister and Ayana was justifiable defense against imminent harm. All charges against McAllister and Ayana are dismissed. The Blackwood estate is hereby seized, assets to be distributed among victims and used to fund anti-trafficking operations in this territory." He looked out at the courtroom. "Furthermore, I am issuing warrants for 12 individuals associated with Blackwood's operations. Federal marshals will begin arrests immediately. This court will not tolerate slavery in any form, under any name, in any corner of this territory. We are done here." The gavel fell, and the courtroom exploded with noise. People cheering, Blackwood's associates fleeing, marshals moving to make arrests. Jake sat in the back row, watching it all, watching Ayana surrounded by the other women, watching justice done the right way. Through law, through testimony, through truth spoken in daylight. Outside the courthouse, Ayana found him. "It's over," she said. "Really over this time." "Yeah," Jake said. "Now what?" She looked at him, this man who had saved her life and taught her to fight and stood with her through everything. "Now we live, however we want, wherever we want, together." Jake nodded, side by side. Clayton approached, offering his hand. "You're free to go, both of you. Court's satisfied, charges dropped, and you've got the gratitude of a lot of people." He paused. "What will you do?" Jake looked at Ayana. Ayana looked back, and in that glance was understanding. "Head back to the high country," Jake said. "Got land near Frozen Head that's unclaimed. Figure we'll build something there. Small ranch, nothing big, just enough to matter." "Alone?" "For now," Ayana said, "but maybe not forever. There are other women who need safe places, other people running from Blackwood's world. Maybe what we build can help them too." Clayton smiled. "That sounds like something worth doing. You need anything, you send word. Federal government owes you both a debt that can't be repaid, but we'll sure try." They left Pineville the next morning, riding west toward the mountains. Behind them, the territory was changing. Blackwood's empire dismantled, trafficking rings shut down, laws passed to prevent it from happening again. One man's death had exposed a system, and that system was finally being torn apart. But Jake and Ayana were not looking back. They were looking forward, toward the high country, toward the land they would claim, toward the life they would build, from nothing but stubbornness and refusal to quit. Copper ran ahead, healthy again, tail wagging, leading them home. Spring came reluctantly to the high country, arriving in fits and starts. 3 days of warmth, followed by late snow, then sun again, then freezing rain that coated everything in crystal. But slowly, inexorably, The ice retreated. Streams began to run. Deer returned to the valleys. The world that had been frozen silent for 4 months started to breathe again. Jake stood on the ridge above their land, watching meltwater carve new channels through the rocks. Beside him, Ayana scanned the horizon with the watchfulness she had learned through winter, always looking, always aware that safety was temporary and hard-won.
"Trail should be passable in another week," Jake said. "Maybe less if this warm spell holds." "And then we start building," he nodded. They had spent the winter in Beaumont's cabin, but that was temporary shelter. What they needed now was something permanent. A home built with their own hands on land that belonged to them, not by conquest or purchase, but by the simple act of staying when everything else said run. "We will need help," Ayana said. "2 people cannot build a proper ranch alone." "I know. Thought we might reach out to Sam Weatherby, old mountain man who helped us during the siege. He knows people, has connections to folks who might want honest work for fair pay." "And Ruth?" Jake smiled. "Ruth, too. And anyone else from that trial who needs a fresh start." They walked back to the cabin where Copper waited on the porch, gray muzzle lifted to catch the spring scents. The dog had aged over winter, moving slower, sleeping more. Nothing dramatic, just the inevitable arithmetic of a hard life catching up. But his eyes were still bright, still watching, still protecting the people who had become his pack. Inside, Jake pulled out the small leather pouch where he kept their savings. $23 now, a combination of what he had saved, what Ayana had sewn into her dress, and what Judge Thornton had awarded them from Blackwood's seized assets. Not a fortune, but enough to buy supplies, maybe a few head of cattle if they bought smart. "Not much to start a ranch with," Ayana observed. "We have built more with less." "Have we?" Jake looked at her, at this woman who had walked into his life dying, and transformed it into something worth living. "No, but we will." They left the high country cabin a week later, riding down through Cumberland Gap toward the land they had chosen. Frozen Head Hollow sat in a valley backed by limestone cliffs, with a year-round creek running through the center and natural meadows thick with grass. Sam Weatherby had confirmed it was unclaimed, federal land open for homesteading under the new laws. 160 acres for anyone willing to work it. The journey took 3 days. On the morning of the 4th, they stood at the edge of their valley and looked at what would become home. Overgrown, wild, beautiful in the way untouched places are. The creek sang over smooth stones. Cottonwoods lined the banks, and in the distance, the cliffs rose like fortress walls, protecting the hollow from the worst weather. "Here," Jake said. "We build here." They made camp that first night under the stars, too excited to sleep much. Copper explored the perimeter, marking territory, claiming this place for their small pack. And in the morning, the work began. Building a ranch from wilderness was not romantic. It was brutal, exhausting labor that left them collapsed by the fire each night, too tired to talk, barely able to eat before sleep took them. But they kept at it. Jake cut timber for the cabin, his ruined hand somehow finding ways to do what should have been impossible. Ayana hauled stone from the creek for the foundation, her Apache ancestors whispering techniques for working with the land instead of against it. Together they dug post holes, split logs, mixed mud for chinking. Sam arrived 3 weeks in, riding a mule and bringing tools. "Heard you two were up here building the impossible. Figured you could use a hand." Behind him came others. Ruth Henderson with 2 women from the trial, Sarah and Marie, looking for work and safety. Thomas Sixkiller, a Cherokee carpenter, who had heard about the Apache woman building a refuge and wanted to help.
An old freedman named Silas Mercer, who knew mountain living and had nowhere else to be.
"Heard you pay fair and treat people decent," Thomas said. "Figure that is worth working for." By the end of May, they had a cabin. Not big, not fancy, but solid. Stone foundation, timber walls, a roof that would hold against winter. One large room with a sleeping loft, a stone fireplace Jake built with the same meticulous care he brought to everything, windows facing south to catch the light. The first night they slept inside their own home, Ayana lay on the corn-husk mattress they had stuffed themselves and stared at the ceiling beams. "We did it," she whispered. Jake sat in the chair he had built from salvaged wood. First part, anyway. Still need barn, fences, livestock. But yeah, we did it. June brought more work. They built a barn using plans Thomas drew, timber frame and stone base, big enough for horses and cattle they did not have yet. They cleared fields for planting, Ayana teaching them Apache techniques for working dry soil. They strung fences using wire Sam brought from town, marking boundaries that said this land was theirs now, worked and claimed and earned. And people kept coming. A young Cherokee woman named Kaya, 19, fleeing an arranged marriage, arrived one evening with nothing but the clothes she wore. Ruth took her in without question, set her to work in the garden, taught her the same skills Ayana had learned. "You are building something here," Sam said one evening, watching the small community form. "More than a ranch, a refuge." "That is the idea," Jake replied. By August, they had saved enough to buy cattle. 2 pregnant cows from a rancher liquidating his herd. The animals were scraggly, half wild, but they were a start. Jake built a corral, teaching Kaya the basics of animal husbandry the way he had taught Ayana to shoot. Knowledge passed forward, each person teaching what they knew. The work was endless, but good. They planted gardens that fed everyone. They hunted deer and turkey that supplemented their stores. They traded labor with neighboring homesteaders, Jake fixing tools and building furniture in exchange for seed and supplies. Slowly, the ranch became sustainable. One evening in late September, as the aspens turned gold and the air carried that first bite of coming cold, Ayana found Jake on the ridge overlooking the valley. He stood where he always stood when he needed to think, watching their small world take shape below. "You come up here a lot," she said, joining him. "Reminds me why we stayed, why we fought." She looked at the valley, the cabin with smoke rising from the chimney, the barn housing animals, the garden full of late-harvest vegetables, the people moving through evening routines, a community forming from people who had nowhere else to go. "Do you regret it?" Ayana asked the question she had never asked. "Saving me instead of staying safe?" Jake was quiet for a long moment, choosing his words with the same care he brought to every important thing. "I regret Emma dying while I did nothing. I regret the years I spent hiding up here, thinking isolation was the same as peace. I regret that Blackwood got to hurt as many people as he did before someone stopped him." He turned to look at her. "But saving you? Fighting beside you? Building this?" He gestured at the valley. "Not once. Not for a single second." Ayana nodded, accepting the truth of it. "Good, because I needed to hear that." October brought the first real test. A woman arrived at dusk, beaten, terrified, running from timber camps to the north. She collapsed at their gate, unable to even speak her name. Ruth and Ayana carried her inside, tended her wounds, asked no questions until she was ready to talk. Her name was Catherine, 23, taken from a wagon train 6 months back. She had escaped during a supply run, walked for 3 days, following rumors of a place where women could be safe.
"Heard in town there was a ranch," Catherine whispered, "run by an Apache woman and a mountain man. Place where Blackwood's kind could not reach you. Is it true?" Ayana held her hand. "It is true. You are safe now. Rest, heal. And when you are ready, if you want to stay, you work like everyone else. Fair pay, fair treatment. That is all we ask." Word spread. By winter, they had 15 people living at the ranch, a community built from broken pieces, each person carrying scars, each person finding ways to heal. They built a second cabin for the women, a bunkhouse for the men. They established rules, work schedules, shared meals that felt like family, even when blood relation did not exist. December came cold and hard, but they were ready this time. Enough wood, enough food, enough shelter for everyone. They spent long evenings around fires, telling stories, teaching skills, building the bonds that turned strangers into something more. Copper spent those evenings moving from person to person, accepting scratches and praise, the elder statesman of their small kingdom. But Jake noticed the dog moving slower each day, sleeping longer, the gray in his muzzle spreading to his whole face. "He is getting old," Ayana said one night, watching Copper struggle to stand. "Yeah. I do not want to lose him." Jake put his arm around her shoulders. "I know. But we do not get to choose how long we get. We just get to choose what we do with the time." Christmas came, and they celebrated together, a strange mix of Christian, Apache, and Cherokee traditions, creating something new. Sam brought venison. Ruth baked bread. Thomas carved small animals for the children who had joined them. And for one night, the darkness of their pasts faded behind the light of their present. One evening in late December, Jake found Ayana in the workshop, carefully carving words into a flat piece of granite Thomas had helped her select. She worked by lantern light, her movements precise, despite the cold numbing her fingers. "What are you making?" Jake asked quietly. She did not look up, just kept working the chisel with patient strokes. "Something for when the time comes, for Copper, so he will have something permanent, so people will know what he did." Jake moved closer and read the words taking shape in the stone. Copper. Found what was lost, saved what mattered, loved without question. His throat tightened. He placed a hand on her shoulder, squeezed once, and left her to finish her work. January brought snow and cold that kept them inside for days. But it also brought a stranger, a federal marshal who had ridden through winter to reach them. For a moment, tensions spiked. But this marshal was not Clayton. This was someone new, someone they did not know. "Name is William Cross," the marshal said, warming himself by the fire. "Work out of Washington now. Heard about what you're building here. Place for trafficking survivors, refuge for people with nowhere else to go." "That is right," Jake said carefully. "Government wants to help. Congress passed new laws against trafficking, set aside funds for support programs. Your ranch could be model for others. Federal backing, supplies, legal protection. Interested?" Jake and Ayana exchanged glances. "What is the catch?" "No catch. Just records. Names of people you help, where they came from, proof the program works. And you open your doors to anyone who needs it, not just people running from Blackwood's empire." "We already do that." "Then we have a deal." By spring of 1894, the ranch had grown again. Federal support meant proper buildings, more land cleared, resources to help more people. They built a schoolhouse where Ayana taught English and Ruth taught reading. They built a workshop where Thomas trained young men in carpentry. They built a healing house where Catherine, who had trained as a nurse before her capture, tended the sick. The ranch had a name now. Folks in the valley called it Thornwood Haven, after Jake's last name and Judge Thornton, who had made it all possible. But the people who lived there just called it home. One morning in April, Jake woke to find Copper had not gotten up. The dog lay in his favorite spot under the cottonwood tree, breathing slow and shallow, eyes closed. Jake knelt beside him, ran his hand over the graying muzzle, and knew. "Ayana," he called quietly. She came, knelt on the other side of Copper, and understood immediately. "How long?" "Not long." They sat with him through the morning. Other people came, said their goodbyes, thanked the dog who had started it all by finding a dying woman in the wilderness and refusing to leave her. Copper's tail wagged weakly, acknowledging each person, and then he grew still. Jake checked for breath, for heartbeat, for any sign of the fierce spirit that had saved them all. Nothing. Copper was gone, passed peacefully in the place he had claimed as home, surrounded by the pack he had built. They buried him on the ridge overlooking the valley, the highest point on their land where he could watch over everything he had protected. Jake dug the grave deep, while Ayana retrieved the stone she had carved months ago, carrying it up the hill with reverent care. They lowered Copper into the earth, wrapped in the coat Ayana had worn the day he found her. It seemed right, completing the circle. Jake placed the marker at the head of the grave. The words Ayana had carved months before seemed prophetic now. Copper found what was lost, saved what mattered, loved without question. Ayana spoke, her voice carrying across the valley. "You found me when I was dying, and you did not leave me. You brought me to someone who would fight for me when I could not fight for myself. You protected us, guarded us, loved us without asking anything in return." She touched the stone. "Thank you, Copper. Thank you for everything. We will carry you with us always." They stood together as the sun set, painting the valley in shades of gold and red. Two people and a dog-shaped absence, learning to live with one more scar, one more loss, one more price paid for daring to love something. But even in grief, there was gratitude. Because without Copper, Ayana would have died on that ridge. Without Copper, Jake would still be alone in a burned cabin, hiding from life. Without Copper, none of this, the land, the home, the community, the lives saved and rebuilt, would exist. The years that followed proved what they had built would last. The ranch grew to accommodate 30 people at its peak, each one carrying stories of survival and finding hope. They built more cabins, expanded the fields, bought more cattle until the herd numbered 40 head. Other ranches formed nearby, inspired by their model. A network developed across the mountains, safe houses and refuges connected by people who understood that survival was easier when shared. Jake aged into his 40s, his beard going gray, his body bearing the accumulated weight of hard work. But his eyes were clearer than they had been in 20 years. The ghosts that had ridden his shoulders, Emma's death, his failures, his isolation, had not disappeared, but they had quieted. He had found a way to balance accounts with the past by building a future that mattered. Ayana became known throughout the territory, the Apache woman who had survived Blackwood and turned her pain into purpose. She traveled sometimes, speaking to other communities, teaching survival skills, advocating for laws that protected the vulnerable. But she always came home to the valley, to the land she and Jake had claimed together. In the summer of 1897, 5 years after that autumn day when Copper found her dying, Ayana stood on the ridge beside Copper's grave and looked at what they had built, Smoke rose from a dozen chimneys. Children played in the yard. People worked with purpose and dignity. This was not just survival. This was thriving. Jake found her there, as he always did, climbing the ridge with the same slight limp he had carried since the battle. "You come up here a lot," he said, echoing her words from years before. "Reminds me why we fought, why we stayed." A new figure appeared at the gate below. A young woman, frightened, running from something. Sarah, who now managed the intake process, met her with open arms. "Another one," Ayana observed. "Yeah." Jake watched Sarah guide the newcomer toward the healing house. "We will help her, same as all the others. Do you ever wonder when it will end? When we can stop fighting?" Jake was quiet, looking at the valley they had built from nothing but stubbornness and refusal to quit. "I think this is the fight now. Not battles and bullets, but this. Giving people a place to heal, teaching them to be strong, making sure what happened to you, to Emma, to all those women in Blackwood's ledger, matters for something." Ayana took his hand, the gesture natural after 5 years of partnership. "Then we keep going. Always." That simple word, worn smooth by repetition, carrying the weight of everything they had survived and everything they had built. The sun lowered toward the mountains, painting the valley in amber light. Smoke from chimneys rose straight in the still air. The sound of hammer on wood, children laughing, creek flowing over stone, created a symphony of ordinary life that felt like victory. And on the ridge above it all, a weathered stone kept watch, bearing witness to the truth that changed everything. A dog had found her in the dust when the world said she did not matter, and from that moment forward, 3 lives had changed direction, expanding into community, into purpose, into proof that what seemed broken could be forged into something stronger. The wind moved through the grass, carrying the scent of pine and sage and home. And if you listened close enough, in the gathering dusk, you could almost hear the contented sigh of a dog who had done his job well and could finally rest, knowing the people he had brought together would take care of each other long after his watch had ended. Jake's voice broke the silence, quiet but certain. "You know what Sam said last week? Said this place reminds him of the old mountain communities, back when people looked out for each other because they had to. Said we are not building something new, we are remembering something old." "Maybe both," Ayana replied. "Old wisdom, new purpose." Below them, lanterns began to light, one by one, in the windows. Catherine rang the bell for evening meal. People emerged from cabins and workshops, gathering together the way they did every night, a ritual of community that said, "You are not alone, you are not forgotten, you matter here." "My mother told me once," Ayana said, "that the mountain remembers every seed planted. We planted hope here, Jake, and it grew." He nodded, unable to speak past the tightness in his throat. 5 years ago he had been a broken man hiding in the wilderness, certain that caring about anything would only bring pain. Now he stood on land he had claimed, surrounded by people he had helped save, partnered with a woman who had transformed his isolation into purpose. Some promises could not be kept for those already lost. Emma would never come home. Ayana's family would never be restored. The women in Blackwood's ledger would never get back the years stolen from them. But they could keep promises for those they found. They could build something that said, "Your pain was not meaningless. Your survival was not an accident. Your life has value that no one can take away." That was legacy enough. The last light faded from the sky, stars emerging one by one in the vast darkness above the mountains. Jake and Ayana walked down from the ridge together, heading toward the lights and warmth and people who waited below. Behind them, Copper's stone stood sentinel, marking the place where everything had changed. And in the valley, Thornwood Haven settled into another evening, another day of survival transformed into living, another chapter in a story that had started with a dog refusing to leave a dying woman alone in the wilderness. The story that began with blood in the dust ended with light in the valley. And that made all the difference.